Space is silent, but silence has never meant safety. The asteroid belt shimmered in scattered fragments of rock and ice, drifting in a ballet that had lasted billions of years. To most, it was a dead zone, a graveyard of stone. But to the crew of the Vigilant, a lone human patrol ship, the belt was a watchtower. Inside the dim-lit bridge, Ensign Carter stared at his screen. Something was moving where nothing should be. "Captain," he whispered, his voice tight. "I've got an anomaly at bearing 189. No registry, no transponder." Captain Marin leaned forward, her brow furrowed. The scanners showed a black shape weaving between asteroids, too deliberate, too precise. Not random drift, not a minor. Something else. "Put it on main display," she ordered. The crew gasped. The vessel was angular, wrong in design, a silhouette that didn't match any human ship. Its hull seemed to shimmer, bending starlight like water. It looked alive. Marin's throat tightened. "Unknown contact. Send standard hail." Carter tapped commands. A pulse of light left the Vigilant, racing toward the shadow. For a moment, nothing happened. The alien vessel glided on, ignoring them. Then, its skin rippled. Panels shifted. "Captain," Lieutenant Rhee said quietly, "it's charging weapons." The screen lit up with a sudden flare. Blue fire erupted from the alien craft, tearing through the belt. A spear of energy screamed toward the Vigilant. "Evasive! Shields up!" Marin shouted. The ship shuddered as the blast scraped across their shields, warning klaxons blaring. The crew snapped into action, hands flying across controls, adrenaline slamming through their veins. Carter's voice cracked. "They're not answering our hail, they're targeting us again." Marin's eyes narrowed. There was no mistaking it now. This wasn't a lost freighter. It wasn't a probe. It was a hunter. "Return fire," she said coldly. The Vigilant roared to life. Railguns spat tungsten rounds into the void, streaks of fire flashing between drifting asteroids. Missiles ignited, carving arcs of light as they slammed toward the alien ship. The first missile struck true. A ripple of fire burst across the alien hull, illuminating twisted geometry beneath the camouflage. The ship shrieked in the void, a noise not heard, but felt in the bones, as if the alien vessel itself was alive and screaming. "Direct hit!" Rhee shouted. But the enemy didn't die. Its hull flexed, knitting itself back together. It lunged forward, spitting more plasma. The Vigilant rolled, engines screaming, slipping between asteroid shadows, asteroids shattered under alien fire, debris scattering like frozen fireworks. The black of space filled with deadly glitter. "Shields failing!" Carter yelled. Marin knew it was down to seconds. She stood, steady against the shaking deck. "Target their core. Overload railguns. Give me every shot we have left." The ship trembled as power was rerouted. The railguns thumped in furious rhythm, each round striking deeper, tearing at alien plating. For a heartbeat, the void lit up with fury. And then, silence. On the screen, the alien vessel faltered. A fissure split its hull, glowing white-hot. In a final blinding explosion, it erupted into shards of metal and fire. The crew stared in silence as the fragments drifted away, cooling embers against the black canvas of space. Carter's voice broke the stillness. "Captain, we destroyed it." Marin didn't answer at first. Her eyes lingered on the wreckage, but her mind was elsewhere. She had seen the pulse before the ship died, a faint flash, an outbound transmission. "They weren't here by accident," she said finally, her voice low. "That ship was scouting us, and now someone out there knows we exist." The bridge went quiet. The asteroid belt, once peaceful, now felt like the stage for something far larger. Marin straightened, her jaw set. "Record everything. Send it to command. The galaxy just knocked on our door." Above the drifting wreckage, the stars gleamed coldly. silent witnesses to a spark that would soon become an inferno. Moral closing. Suspense. Wars don't always begin with banners, speeches, or declarations. Sometimes they begin with silence, broken by fire. Humanity has struck first blood, not by choice, but by survival. And across the void, the Krith now know, the spark has been lit. The broadcast began as a whisper. Across Earth and her scattered colonies, shaky footage from the Vigilant flickered onto every screen. An alien vessel shimmering in the void, firing without warning, and then dying in a flash of fire. The images, repeated again and again, dissected frame by frame as analysts debated what it meant. But the people already knew. It meant war. On Mars, in the storm shadow of the Valles Marineris domes, workers gathered around public projectors. They watched in silence as Captain Marin's voice crackled through the recording. "Unknown vessel destroyed. Enemy transmission confirmed outbound." Someone whispered, "If they sent a signal, they're coming." No one disagreed. At Crucible Base, the military's training ground in orbit above Luna, cadets filled the mess hall, arguments breaking out like wildfire. "They fired first," a young cadet snarled. "We had no choice." Another shook his head. "It doesn't matter. We just declared war on something we don't understand." At the head table, Admiral Heston sat in silence, his weathered eyes fixed on the display of the alien wreckage. He had seen war before. Not like this, but close enough. He muttered almost to himself. They forgot. The galaxy forgot why humanity was left alone. The cadets fell silent at his words, though none fully understood. In the halls of Earth's high command, the debate was less about guilt and more about survival. Encrypted signals confirmed what the Vigilant had feared. The alien ship was Krith, a scout from an empire older than human civilization. The data showed coordinated transmissions spreading across star lanes, like ripples in water, carrying one message. Humanity has been found. The room of generals and ministers turned cold. "They'll test us first," one said grimly. "Probe our defenses, measure our strength, and if they find us weak," another asked. "They won't find us weak," Admiral Heston growled, his voice sharp as steel. "They'll find us ready." Meanwhile, in the shadowed corners of the outer colonies, fear was louder than confidence. On Europa, children were pulled from icy schools and sent into subterranean shelters. On Ceres, miners loaded weapons onto cargo ships, turning lifelines into makeshift fleets. Broadcasts from Titan carried one phrase repeated by refugees: "Don't wait for them to come. Strike first." But Earth was not united. Some leaders begged for diplomacy, claiming the encounter might be misunderstanding. Others demanded immediate mobilization. The tension split across every channel, every screen, and through it all, the whispers grew. 2 weeks later, the whispers turned into proof. A deep space listening array near Neptune intercepted a fleet, massive signatures approaching from the edge of human space. Krith ships. Dozens. The array's final message burned into the net before its destruction. Grainy stills of alien dreadnoughts, their forms jagged and unnatural, blotting out the stars behind them. The images sent chills across every colony. On Mars, storms rattled the domes as people huddled in fear. On Earth, cities that had grown lazy in peace suddenly surged with panic buying, protests, and soldiers patrolling streets. And in the mess hall of Crucible Base, cadets fell into silence as the news played overhead. One cadet muttered, "They're coming for us." Another asked, "Are we ready?" The silence was answer enough. Admiral Heston stood before the gathered officers that night, his voice grim but steady. "Make no mistake, the Krith didn't stumble onto us. They've been watching, waiting, and now they're moving. Some of you still don't believe we can win. Some of you still think we're weak. But you need to remember, Humanity has survived everything thrown at us, not because we are the strongest, but because we refuse to die." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "Send the word to every outpost, every colony, every shipyard. This is not a drill. The Krith are coming, and the spark has become fire." Saturn's rings glimmered like frozen fire across the black void, vast arcs of ice and stone, beautiful and eternal. For decades, Titan Station had hung in their shadow, humanity's proud jewel of the outer system. It was more than a military post. It was a city. Families lived there, children laughed in its domes, trade ships passed through its ports. To most humans, Titan Station felt untouchable, but nothing in the void was untouchable. The warning came too late. At 00:0300 station time, long-range sensors screamed alarms, massive energy signatures blooming at the edge of the system. The Krith fleet had arrived. On Titan's command deck, Commander Arya Sloane's voice cut through the chaos. "All civilians to evacuation transports. Defensive batteries online. This is not a drill." Her officers scrambled, faces pale but determined. Outside, the black canvas of space came alive with movement. Shapes slid from the darkness, jagged warships, their hulls shimmering as if space itself recoiled around them. Krith dreadnoughts, each larger than a city block, moved in silent formation. One officer whispered, "God help us." The Krith did not announce themselves. They did not demand surrender. They simply opened fire. The first volley ripped through Titan's outer defenses. Gun platforms flared once, then went dark, explosions scattering debris like sparks across the rings. Inside the station, panic surged. Families ran through corridors filled with smoke, alarms blaring. Children clutched their parents as emergency. Lights painted the walls red. Evacuation ships launched, fragile against the backdrop of war. But the Krith were merciless. Plasma beams carved through the fleeing transports, erasing hundreds of lives in streaks of fire before they ever reached safety. On the command deck, Commander Sloane stood rigid, her hands trembling as she gave the order. "Return fire!" Titan's batteries thundered, missiles streaking toward the alien fleet. For a heartbeat, there was hope. The explosions lit up the void. But as the smoke cleared, the Krith ships remained, their hulls twisting and knitting back together as if mocking human effort. Sloane's voice broke. They're not even slowing down." In Earth's high command, desperate messages crackled through subspace relays. Titan's last transmissions streamed in grainy and broken, carrying only glimpses, alien fire tearing through the station, civilians screaming in darkened corridors, officers fighting to the last. The final broadcast froze across every human. Screen. Titan's main dome ruptured, atmosphere venting into space as flames consumed the station's heart. Then, silence. Back on Earth, shock rippled like an earthquake. In the streets of New Berlin, millions gathered around public screens, watching Titan's death replay on loop. In Mars domes, children cried as they saw transports disintegrated before their eyes. On Ceres, miners slammed fists against steel tables, rage boiling hotter than fear. "They killed Titan! They killed families! We won't wait! We'll fight!" Recruitment surged overnight. Lines stretched around block after block as men and women of every colony volunteered, not out of patriotism, but vengeance. Humanity's grief had turned to fury. At Crucible Base, cadets watched the broadcast in silence. Some wept openly, others clenched fists until their knuckles bled. Admiral Heston stood at the front, his voice like iron. "The Krith believe this will break us. That Titan's fire will frighten us into submission. They don't understand what they've done. They haven't weakened us. They've united us." His eyes scanned the cadets, each one burning with grief and anger. Mark this day in your memory, because this was the last day the Krith thought humanity would run. From here forward, we fight. In the ashes of Titan, fragments drifted through Saturn's rings, glowing faintly against the starlight. Among the wreckage, hidden beacons pulsed, the Krith broadcasting their victory into the void. It was not just destruction. It was a message, and every human who saw it understood. Humanity was at war. Moral closing. Suspense. Tragedy can shatter a people, or it can forge them. The Krith thought Titan's destruction would break humanity. Instead, it lit a fire no empire could extinguish. In grief, humans found unity. In loss, they found fury. And the endless fire was only beginning. Earth's orbit burned like a forge. For weeks after Titan's fall, the planet's shipyards had not slept. Great skeletal frames of destroyers and cruisers glowed against the black sky, bathed in the fiery sparks of construction drones. Cargo shuttles swarmed like wasps, delivering steel, fuel, and munitions. Engines thundered to life one after another, their roars echoing through the void. The whole world was building an army. Inside High Command, the atmosphere was heavier than iron. Admiral Heston stood at the center of the War Council, grim eyes fixed on a holographic projection of the solar system. Red markers littered the map, Krith fleet sightings pushing deeper, faster. "They'll expect us to cower behind Earth," Heston said, his voice hard. "They'll expect us to protect what's left. But we won't. We'll meet them. We'll bleed them." A minister frowned. "We're outnumbered. Their technology eclipses ours. We can't fight them in open space." Heston's jaw tightened. "No, we can't. Yet." He tapped a command into the table. A new file glowed across the holo display, stamped with warning seals that hadn't been touched in over a century. Project Ara's gasps rippled around the room. A younger general whispered, "Those weapons were buried for a reason." "Because they scared our allies more than our enemies," Heston growled. "But the Krith don't fear us. Not yet. It's time they remember why humanity was left alone." Beneath the frozen plains of Antarctica, old doors groaned open. Sealed, bunkers long forgotten hissed as their locks broke. Inside, weapons slumbered, rail cannons that could tear a ship in half, missile warheads too devastating to test, stealth systems so advanced they were deemed unsafe. Now, one by one, they were awakened. Soldiers stared at the arsenals with a mixture of awe and dread. These weren't weapons of defense. They were weapons of annihilation. Meanwhile, on Crucible Base, cadets watched as new warships assembled outside their windows. Fresh crews were drafted daily, their faces lined with grief, but their spines straight with resolve. Cadet Tessa Alvar whispered to her squad mates, "They thought Titan would break us." Her eyes blazed as she clenched her fists. "All they did was give us something to fight for." Across the mess hall, silence broke into cheers. The first test of humanity's awakening came at Proxima Centauri. 3 Krith cruisers moved in to cut off the human colony there, their black hulls sliding silently through the void. Awaiting them was the destroyer Ironclad, barely finished, crewed by volunteers who had trained for only weeks. Its captain, Elias Dorn, stood on the bridge, sweat glistening on his brow. "Shields up. Bring Ares systems online," he ordered. The crew hesitated. No one had ever fired these weapons. No one knew if they'd even work. Dorn's voice hardened. "Do it." The Ironclad's hull vibrated as hidden ports opened. From them launched a storm of experimental kinetic lances. Rods of pure tungsten accelerated to near relativistic speed. The void lit up. The first lance tore through a Krith cruiser, punching clean through its core. The second crippled another, ripping jagged holes into its shimmering hull. For the first time, Krith ships faltered, their armor cracking, their movement chaotic. The bridge erupted in shouts. "They're breaking formation! We hit them! We actually hit them!" Captain Dorn didn't smile. His eyes stayed fixed on the burning wreckage. "Remember this moment. Remember Titan. This isn't victory. It's proof we can bleed them. With that, the ironclad fired again, sending the final Krith cruiser limping into retreat. Across the colonies, the footage spread like wildfire. Humanity had struck back, not with desperation, but with precision. For the first time since Titan, hope flickered. In the bars of Mars, workers lifted glasses and roared. On Ceres, miners painted ironclad across their helmets. On Earth, millions stood in streets, watching the replay with tears streaming down their faces, not of grief, but of pride. Humanity had awakened. Moral, closing suspense. The Krith thought Titan would end humanity. Instead, it forged them. Humanity's greatest strength has never been its numbers nor its technology, but its refusal to surrender. In grief, they built ships. In loss, they unearthed nightmares. And now the galaxy will learn. Humans fight best when cornered. War spread like wildfire through the colonies. Where once there had been trade ships and mining convoys, now there were fleets of burning wreckage drifting through the void. The Krith struck swiftly, slashing into human systems with overwhelming force. Entire settlements fell in hours, but instead of breaking, humanity adapted. Every loss became a lesson. Every scar, a reminder. On Europa, the Krith unleashed their ground machines, towering constructs of black alloy, moving on spindled legs like nightmare arachnids. They crawled across the ice, their plasma cannons turning the frozen surface into seas of steam, but the humans didn't run. From tunnels beneath the crust, miners emerged with weapons barely held together by duct tape and grit. Rail drills, repurposed into cannons, explosives packed from mining charges. The first battle lasted 3 days. When it ended, half of Europa's colonies were ash. But the Krith found their war machines buried beneath rubble, brought down not by fleets, but by stubborn workers who refused to abandon their home. On Mars, the skies burned red with constant fire. Krith dropships rained from orbit, disgorging their soldiers, angular creatures clad in armor that shimmered like glass. The Martian Defense Corps met them in trenches, carved into the dust. Lieutenant Kara Imani crouched low as artillery thundered overhead. Around her, soldiers shouted, coughed, and bled into the sand. The Krith advanced, unstoppable in their numbers. A young private beside her trembled, muttering, "We can't hold them. We can't." Imani grabbed him by the collar, eyes blazing. "We don't need to hold them. We just need to teach them how we fight." She stood, rifle in hand, and charged the line. Behind her, the others rose, voices hoarse but unyielding. The trench became a storm of fire and blood. When the Krith finally withdrew, they left thousands of their own dead across the Martian sands. Humanity hadn't won, but they hadn't lost either. And that was enough. In orbit, battles were less brutal. The destroyer Ironclad had become a legend after Proxima, and now human crews across the fleet mimicked its tactics. Short bursts, unpredictable maneuvers, suicidal bravery. Krith commanders soon discovered that every time they faced humans, the strategy they had used last time no longer worked. They evolved too quickly, a Krith warlord snarled aboard his flagship. Every battle changes them. Every loss hardens them. Another hissed, mandibles clicking in unease. They are not fighting to win territory. They are fighting to endure. That is unnatural. The warlord turned, his many eyes narrowing. Then we must end them before they adapt further, burn their colonies to the last ember. But humans were already spreading the fire themselves. On Ceres, refugees who had lost everything turned asteroid mines into ambush zones, luring Krith ships into tunnels rigged with explosives. On the moons of Jupiter, engineers rewired civilian haulers into battering rams. Even fleeing convoys became weapons, sacrificing themselves to drag Krith destroyers into planetary atmospheres. Everywhere the Krith pressed, resistance rose like weeds through concrete. Admiral Heston watched the battle reports in silence aboard the carrier Resolute. The war map glowed crimson with countless lost colonies, yet threads of blue still pulsed where humanity fought on. He leaned over the hollow table, whispering more to himself than his officers. "We're not winning, not yet, but neither are they. And the longer we last, the more dangerous we become." His officers nodded grimly. They all knew the truth. Humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their fleets or their numbers. It was their refusal to stay broken. In the trenches of Mars, beneath Europa's shattered ice, in the burning skies above Saturn, the same truth was written in blood. The Krith had underestimated their prey, and prey, when cornered, bites moral. Closing suspense. Strength isn't found in perfect plans or overwhelming power. Strength is found in the will to rise again, bloodied but unbroken. The Krith believed war would crush humanity quickly. Instead, every colony they touched lit another spark. The endless fire was spreading, and soon it would consume far more than they imagined. The war had burned for months, and though humanity endured, the cost was unbearable. Colonies smoldered, fleets bled, and still the Krith pressed forward. But in the ashes of defeat, humans found their chance. It began with an intercepted transmission. A shattered Krith cruiser drifted near Europa's orbit, crippled by human fire. Salvage teams crawled through its twisted halls, choking on alien air as they scoured for intelligence. Inside, they found it, a crystalline core pulsing with unnatural light. Psionic signals radiated from it, linking every Krith ship within range. Dr. Ilara Voss, head of human xenoscience, studied the core in awe and terror. "This isn't just communications," she whispered. "This is control. Their fleets move as one because they think as one. Sever this link and you cut the head from the serpent." Admiral Heston's grim face appeared on the holoscreen. "Then we find their heart, and we strike it." Thus, Operation Spark was born. The target. A Krith dreadnought, larger than any human city, bristling with weapons and cloaked in shimmering fields. Deep within its belly lay the psionic hub, amplifying signals across the fleet. The mission: infiltrate and destroy it. Success could turn the war. Failure would mean annihilation. The strike team boarded the stealth corvette Phantom's Veil. They were handpicked. Soldiers, engineers, and one reluctant scientist, Dr. Voss herself. Captain Elias. Dorn, the same man who had commanded the ironclad at Proxima, led them. His voice was steady as the corvette slid into enemy territory, hidden in the shadow of a drifting asteroid. "Listen up," he said. "The Krith don't know fear. They don't understand it. But after tonight, they will. We go in quiet. We plant the charges. And we cut out their heart." The team nodded, silent but resolute. The Phantom's Veil latched onto the dreadnought's hull like a parasite. Cutting torches hissed, opening a breach into alien metal that seemed to pulse under their touch, as though alive. Inside, the halls glowed faintly, walls rippling with liquid light. The air was thick, pressing against their chests. Every step echoed too loudly, every shadow seemed to move. Private Wren muttered, "Feels like we're walking through a throat." Dorn raised a fist. "Quiet." They advanced deeper, weapons drawn. Strange vibrations hummed through the walls like a distant heartbeat. Halfway in, the first Krith patrol emerged, angular figures with limbs too long, eyes burning with psionic glow. The firefight was brutal and silent, save for the hiss of suppressed rifles and the shriek of alien weapons. The humans moved like shadows, dropping patrols before alarms spread, but each encounter left them shaken. The Krith didn't scream when killed. They didn't falter. They simply collapsed, lifeless, as if puppets with cut strings. Dr. Voss whispered, "They're bound to the hub, completely." At last they reached the chamber. The psionic core loomed before them, a massive crystalline heart suspended in the air, pulsing with alien light. Streams of energy radiated outward, connecting to conduits that seemed to stretch through the entire ship. The very air vibrated, filling their skulls with whispers not their own. Ren clutched his head, trembling. "It's in my mind. Focus!" Dorn barked. He turned to Voss. "You know what to do!" Hands shaking, Voss planted the charges at the base of the conduits. The whispers grew louder, filling the chamber with alien voices. For a moment she froze. "They know we're here." Alarms blared. Krith soldiers poured into the chamber, weapons shrieking. The strike team opened fire. Plasma bolts seared the air, humans shouting as they fought back to back. One soldier fell, then another, but the charges were armed. 30 seconds, Voss cried. Dorn dragged her toward the exit as the firefight closed in. He slammed his rifle dry, then hurled a grenade into the wave of aliens. "Go!" The survivors sprinted through the burning halls, the dreadnought convulsing around them as if alive and writhing. Behind them, the core detonated. The explosion tore through the dreadnought, ripping the psionic hub apart. The entire ship spasmed, its weapons falling silent. Across the sector, Krith fleets faltered, their perfect coordination collapsing into chaos. Human warships seized the moment. Where once they had been prey, now they were predators. The Resolute led the charge, tearing apart disoriented Krith cruisers. For the first time, humanity didn't just survive a battle, they won it. On the bridge of the Resolute, Admiral Heston watched the Krith fleet break apart. His lips tightened into the ghost of a smile. "One spark," he murmured, and the fire spreads. Moral, closing suspense. Even the mightiest empire can be undone by its own strength. The Krith bound themselves together so tightly that a single strike unraveled them. Humanity proved that courage, even from a handful of soldiers, could tilt the scales of war. The fire had turned, and now it was spreading faster than ever. The Krith thought the destruction of one dreadnought would be an isolated loss. A wound, nothing more. They were wrong. The galaxy had been watching. On the smoldering colonies of Vega, slaves of a dozen species toiled under Krith overseers. They had lived in silence for generations, heads bowed, hope long extinguished. But when word spread, whispers carried by smugglers and stolen comms, that humans had shattered a Krith dreadnought, those whispers became sparks. In hidden chambers, alien workers gathered, clawed hands clenched, wings flexed for the first time in years. Eyes once dulled with despair glimmered with something dangerous, hope. On Mars, Lieutenant Imani stared across the battlefield of red dust, still smoking with Krith wreckage. The humans had held their ground. This time, the Krith had retreated. First, her soldiers, exhausted, bloodied, hollow-eyed, stood taller now. "Listen," Imani said, raising her voice to the gathered survivors. "For months, we've bled, we've buried our dead, and they thought that would break us. But it hasn't. We just burned their greatest weapon to ash, and that means they can bleed too." The roar that followed shook the air. It wasn't victory. It was something fiercer. It was belief. In the void above Saturn, a crippled Krith cruiser drifted. Human boarding teams stormed aboard, expecting another fight. But instead of claws and shrieks, they found the crew. Confused. Disoriented. The loss of their psionic link left them fractured, each alien soldier suddenly alone in its own mind. One Krith raised its weapon, then stopped. Its gaze lingered on the humans. For the first time, there was hesitation. "Sir?" a Marine reported uneasily. "They're afraid." Meanwhile, across the stars, sparks became wildfire. On the planet Zerath Prime, reptilian slaves rose from their mines, wielding stolen Krith rifles. On the frozen moon, Kairos, insectoid workers overran their overseers, wings tearing through the skies. Even in systems where humans had never set foot, the message was clear. The Krith could be resisted, and all it had taken was one spark. The Krith High Command seethed in fury. In colossal halls carved from obsidian, warlords shrieked and slammed their claws into the ground. "They spread rebellion," one bellowed. "These humans infect the galaxy with defiance," another hissed, mandibles clattering. "We underestimated their contagion, fear we could crush, but belief, it multiplies." The Supreme Overlord rose, towering above them all. His voice echoed like grinding stone. "Then we extinguish it. Every ember, every colony. Burn humanity from existence before the fire consumes us all." The chamber fell silent. The order was clear. Back aboard the Resolute, Admiral Heston leaned over the war table. Blue lights flickered where rebellions flared across the map, spreading like cracks through the Krith Empire. Dr. Voss stood at his side, voice hushed with awe. "They thought we were alone, but we lit the spark, and now others carry the torch." Heston's gaze hardened. "Good, because the Krith won't wait. They'll come for us with everything they have left, and when they do, we'll show them this fire doesn't die." In the shadows of the Resolute's hangar, Captain Dorn sat with his surviving strike team. The memory of the Dreadnought's core still burned in his mind. He watched his soldiers polish weapons, share quiet laughs, and patch their wounds. They weren't unscarred. They weren't unafraid, but they were ready. Dorn whispered to himself, "We showed them what happens when they push us too far, and they'll never forget it." Beyond the human colonies, uprisings raged, rebellions burned, and fleets once loyal to the Krith splintered. The galaxy was no longer silent. It was alive with fire. Moral, closing suspense, one act of defiance, can ignite more than victory. It can inspire others to rise. The Krith believed power was in control. Humanity proved power is in hope, in belief, in the fire that spreads when even one refuses to bow. But now the Krith prepared their final, desperate strike to snuff out humanity before the blaze consumed their empire. The galaxy burned with rebellion. Worlds once silent roared with defiance. And at the center of it all, Earth stood as the spark the Krith could not extinguish. The Krith High Command had one answer left: annihilation. The first sign came as the stars over Earth dimmed. One by one, constellations vanished, swallowed by shadows. Then the shadows moved. The Krith fleet had arrived. It blotted out the sky. Thousands of ships, dreadnoughts the size of mountains, their psionic signals thundering through space like a storm. The invasion wasn't just an attack. It was an execution. Admiral Heston stood on the bridge of the Resolute, jaw clenched. "This is it. Every ship, every soldier, they mean to erase us." Captain Dorn's voice crackled through the comms from the ground command bunker. "Then we make damn sure history remembers who we were." The battle began in orbit. Human fleets surged forward, smaller and fewer but faster, darting through the Krith wall like sparks through dry grass. Plasma fire tore the void apart. Carriers vomited fighters into the chaos, weaving between dreadnought beams that lit space like suns. For every human ship destroyed, two more pressed forward, driven not by unity of thought but by sheer will. And below, Earth itself became a battlefield. Cities turned into fortresses. New York's skyline bristled with missile platforms. The deserts of Nevada glowed with hidden cannons, firing beams that scorched the sky. On the steppes of Asia, tanks rumbled across ancient ground, their treads digging into soil that had seen centuries of wars. None like this. Civilians took up arms, fighting in streets, alleys, and rooftops. Children of Earth stood beside veterans, their eyes blazing with the same defiance. Humanity had never been more united. But the Krith came in endless waves. Columns of alien troops descended, their claws tearing through defenses. Giant war beasts, Hulking constructs of flesh and metal crushed human lines beneath their weight. Overhead, swarms of fighters shrieked like a storm of locusts, blotting out the sun. At ground command, Captain Dorn barked orders through the thunder of battle. "Hold the line! Every second we stand, the fleets above have another chance." Beside him, Dr. Voss worked furiously at a psionic disruptor, her hands bleeding from shattered tools. "If I can amplify the signal, just once, we can throw their fleet into chaos again." "Do it," Dorn growled. "We'll buy you the time." Above Earth, the Resolute shuddered as a dreadnought's beam slashed across its hull. Fires raged across the bridge. Admiral Heston refused to leave his post. "Focus fire! Take their command ship apart, piece by piece." The Resolute's cannons roared, joined by every surviving vessel. One by one, they converged on the Krith flagship, a fortress of obsidian metal, its core glowing like a star. The clash shook the heavens. On the ground, the disruptor whined as Voss connected the final conduit. Krith soldiers stormed the bunker. Shrieking in psionic rage, Dorn stood in the breach, rifle blazing. His soldiers fell one by one around him, but he never yielded ground. "Now, Voss!" he shouted. The machine screamed to life. A shockwave erupted, invisible yet unstoppable, tearing through the minds of the Krith. Above, the massive fleet wavered. Their unity collapsed. Ships veered wildly. Formations shattered. Soldiers faltered mid-charge. For the first time, the invincible army was confused. "Now!" Admiral Heston roared. "All ships! Strike with everything you have!" The Resolute led the charge, its final volley ripping into the Krith flagship. Explosions blossomed across its hull. And then, with a soundless scream that echoed through every mind, the great ship tore itself apart. The shock rippled through the fleet. The Krith broke. Above Earth, the shadows dissolved into fire and wreckage. Across the galaxy, rebellions surged as news spread. The humans had stood against the storm and survived. The battle was won. But the cost was carved into Earth itself. Cities lay in ruins, millions dead. Yet among the ashes, humanity stood, taller than ever before. On the shattered fields outside New York, Captain Dorn emerged from the rubble, scarred but alive. He gazed at the horizon, where the first rays of dawn pierced the smoke. Dr. Voss limped to his side, voice quiet but fierce. "We lit the fire, and it didn't die." Dorn nodded. "It never will." In the void, the survivors gathered. Human fleets scarred but unbroken. Alien rebels newly free, swearing loyalty not to an empire, but to an idea, that no tyranny could stand against the fire of the free. And far beyond, in the ruins of their empire, the Krith survivors whispered, in fear of the race that had defied them. Humans. Final moral, closing suspense. The Krith believed unity was their strength. Humanity showed that true strength is born from defiance, from the refusal to bow, from the spark of freedom that spreads, until it becomes an inferno. One spark had ignited endless fire, and the galaxy would never be the same again.